Once again, we'd like to turn to the 23rd Psalm, though that's not where we'll be most of the night. But we've been in verse 2, the latter part of that verse. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Everything in verse 2 is a personal experience of His presence. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. So notice twice it is He, me, and then there's a verb in between the two. That's something that He does. But it's He, me. In relation to these two things, He, me, these two persons, there are green pastures, there are still waters. The green pastures and the still waters are of His providing. We are the recipients of those things. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, places of fulfillment. Both the green pastures and the still waters, places of fulfillment, places of rest, places of comfort, refreshment, and satisfaction, assurance, peace, pleasure, perhaps most important, rejuvenation. And these green pastures and still waters are extraordinary places that we, as individuals, can personally experience on a regular basis. Not once every 6 years, but on a regular, daily basis. I believe that God has for us every single day green pastures and still waters. We do not create them. He provides them. He can provide them in places that you would never expect, as we've already seen. But everything here goes back to the Lord is my shepherd. Again, everything in the psalm goes back to that statement. The Lord is my shepherd. He's my guide. He's my caregiver. And now we see He leadeth me. My shepherd, my guide, my caregiver, does not leave me on my own, but He leadeth me. So it's very, very important that we notice and grasp that God's leading and God's provision go together. A lot of people jump to Philippians 4, verse 13. My God shall supply all your need. They live in wickedness. They depart from God, withdraw from God. Well, my God will supply my need. No, He won't. You cannot separate God and His provision. And God's leading and God's provision go together. So the still waters are not experienced apart from His leading. He leadeth me. That means He goes before me. He leadeth me. He is before. He's in front. He goes before us. He leadeth me. Again, leadeth, it's present. It's continuous. It's an ongoing thing. He leadeth me. And as we saw last week, we hear Christ say, follow me. Follow me. He's going to lead, and He says, follow me. And as we saw last week, that is a command, follow me. But it's more than a command. It's also an invitation. Follow me. And every day He gives the command, follow me. And every day He gives the invitation, follow me. So being a command, it is our duty, it is our responsibility to follow Him. Being an invitation, it is our opportunity. It is our privilege to follow Him. So it depends how you look at it. But we ought to look at it both ways. It is both a command, therefore it is our responsibility, but it is also an invitation, therefore it's our privilege to follow Him. Follow me. And again, as we said last week, there is not a time that is exempt from those words. There is not a place, there is not a condition, there is not a circumstance exempt from those words. There is not a time, a place, a condition, or a circumstance that these words do not apply. Whatever the time, wherever the place, whatever the circumstance, whatever the condition, follow me. Follow me. That's the solution. So what we have here is a call. Follow me. And as we've already seen, the time frame of the psalm is stated in verse 6, all the days of my life. How long are we to follow Him? All the days of my life. Doesn't matter what the day is. Doesn't matter what happens on the day. Doesn't matter. That's irrelevant to what we're talking about. He says, follow me. All the days of your life. It is a call to Himself. It is a call to draw near to Him. It is a call for Him to have the preeminence. Follow me. He is to be the preeminent one. It is a call to imitate Him. It is a call to focus upon Him. If you're following somebody, you have to pay attention to where they're going. You have to pay attention to when they turn, when they stop, when they speed up. You have to focus. So when He says, follow me, it's a call to focus upon Him. That's all the days of our life, regardless of the situation. Focus upon Him. It's a call to move in His direction. You can't follow somebody if you're moving in the opposite direction. So it is a call to move in His direction, to go in the same direction as He is. It's a pursuit of Him. Follow me. The end result will be still waters. There will be still waters if you follow Him. They'll be there if you follow Him. Someone says, well, I never have still waters in my life. Well, the problem is, it's not because there's no still waters. The problem is you're not following. Follow me. Follow me. He leadeth me beside the still waters. So the question is, how do we arrive at follow me? It happens all the time. A child of God will say, come under conviction, for lack of a better word. And they will say, you know what? Starting today, I'm going to follow him. And it doesn't last long. And it's not going to. Because it's not something you can just turn a switch, and it happens. So how do we get there? And maybe most of God's people spend their lives every now and then saying, well, I'm going to follow him. That lasts a day or two, and then back to normal. Until the next time, well, I'm going to follow him. But nothing changes. So the question is, how do we get to it? How do I do that? How do I get there? How do I get there? Well, the Bible, Christ makes it very plain how we get there. So if we turn over to Matthew 16, and we've preached from these verses many times, Matthew 16, and we'll read verses 13 through verse 24. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He saith unto them, But whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered. So he's speaking to all of his disciples, but Simon Peter answered in this question, and said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee. That is, that I am the Christ, the Son of God. Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but my Father, which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he, Jesus, turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. What we have just read, we see in verse 13, takes place in Caesarea Philippi. It involves Jesus and his disciples. We see the word his disciples in verse 13. We see it again in verse 21 and again in verse 24. So Jesus, there's a discourse here between Jesus and his disciples. He's speaking to these disciples collectively. But though at times he speaks directly to Peter, but he does so in the hearing of the others and for their benefit. So his disciples, whether he's speaking directly to them or Peter, they're hearing the whole thing. And I believe that everything in the dialogue is leading up to the last two words of verse 24. Follow me. That's the climax of what Jesus is telling them. So everything is leading up to follow me. Now notice in verse 21, there's a transition point. From that time forth began Jesus. From that time forth, something different happened. And again, Jesus began the process of showing his disciples that he was going to go to the cross. And from that time forth in his ministry, Jesus was dealing with that subject. It says, from that time forth began Jesus. And again, he began the process of telling them about the cross. He said how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. So very difficult and trying times were about to happen in the disciples' life. And Jesus is preparing them for those times. And how does he prepare them? Follow me. Follow me. Oh, it's so difficult. It's so hard. Follow me. It's not as difficult if you follow him. Didn't say all the difficulties would go away. But we make it a lot harder by not following him. So he says, everything leads to this, follow me. So how do we arrive at that? Follow me. How do we get there? Well, our text tells us, because everything's leading to this. Verse 13 through 16, there must be a proper knowledge, a proper perception of Jesus Christ. People can come up with all kinds of reasons why they personally do not follow Christ. And this is true in every case. There's a wrong perception of Jesus Christ. You can blame it on who you want. You can blame it on circumstances. But that's not going to get you anywhere, because that's not the reason. The reason people do not follow Jesus Christ, I'm talking God's people, is they do not have a proper perception of Jesus Christ. So what Christ says here in these verses 13 through 16, lays the foundation for everything that follows. Again, we've said before, the Bible is a very logical book. Very logical. And everything that Jesus says in this passage leading to follow me is very logical. It just makes sense. It fits. Christ in verse 13 asked his disciples a question concerning the world's perception of himself. Their answer is given in verse 14. Some say that you are John the Baptist, some say Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. So their answer reveals that the world merely speculates about Jesus Christ. One person, well, I think he's John the Baptist. Well, I think he's Jeremiah. Well, I think he's one of the prophets. Doesn't change your life any. That perception of Christ doesn't change anything about your life. It's just speculation. And in all their speculation, you'll notice they make Christ less than who he is. John the Baptist is less than who Christ is. Elias is less than who Christ is. Jeremiah is less than who Christ is. Take any of the prophets, they're less than who Jesus is. So in all of their speculation, they make Christ less than who he is. And when we do not follow him, it's because we make Christ less than who he is. Because if we realize who he is, you're going to follow him. It's just logical. So, one will never live the ultimate life of follow me without there being a life-changing perception of Jesus Christ. And then he asks a second question in verse 13. knowing that they would not have the same thoughts as the world. He said unto them, But whom say ye that I am? You see, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to your life. It doesn't matter. It does not relate to you following Him what people out there think of Christ. That has nothing to do with you following Him. But what you think of Christ has everything to do with whether or not you're going to follow Him. So he says, Whom say ye that I am? Peter, as he often does, acts as a spokesman. Sometimes that got him in trouble. But he acts as a spokesman. Again, all the disciples are there. They hear the question. They hear Peter's response. And Simon Peter answered and said, Thou art the Christ. He says it with much assurance. Thou art the Christ. He doesn't say, well, we think you're the Christ. He said, Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. He had conviction that He was the Christ. There was assurance there. There was certainty. There was conviction. And one will never follow Christ in a consistent way if they do not have, I don't care how much they say, oh, I know that Jesus is the Christ. I know. Again, it's just like what Jesus said to the woman of the well, If thou knewest, thou wouldest have. They don't know. You have to have conviction of who Christ is. A personal realization of His person. If you're ever going to consist, again, everything's leading to follow me. Secondly, there must be a realization, a personal realization of His grace. Jesus, verse 17, Jesus answered and said unto him, Blessed art thou. Christ is reminding Peter that what he was by the grace of God. He says, Blessed art thou. And then he reminds him of the source of the blessing. For flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. Peter, you are correct. I am the Christ, the Son of the living God. And you are blessed because Mom and Dad didn't reveal that to you. Grandma and Grandpa didn't reveal that to you. But God the Father revealed that truth to you. That's grace. So he's reminding Peter that he's a recipient of the amazing grace of God. Someone says, well, I grew up in church all my life. What's your point? If you don't realize that you're a recipient of God's amazing grace, growing up in church isn't going to cause you to follow Him. It takes more than that. Again, everything's leading to follow me. Verse 18, there has to be a personal realization of our own insufficiency. Why don't people follow Christ? Because they think they can do it on their own. There has to be a realization of our own insufficiency. Every day of our lives we're insufficient. And the sufficiency of Jesus Christ. Verse 18, And I say also unto thee, Thou art Peter. He tells Peter who he is. Peter knew his name. We know our name. But when the Lord says, Thou art, this is who you are. He says, You're Peter. You're Petros. You're just a stone. You're just a pebble. You're not significant. You're not significant. You're not going to make any difference on your own. Thou art a pebble. You're nothing. Again, in reminding Peter of his insignificance and insufficiency, he then directed Peter's attention to himself. And then he says, And upon this rock, pointing to himself, Petra, reminding Peter of his own significance and sufficiency. He says, Peter, you're insignificant. I'm the rock. I'm the rock. I'm the foundation. Again, he's saying to Peter in the hearing of the disciples, you're insignificant. You're insufficient. You can't build a church on a pebble or on a stone. You're insufficient in and of yourself. But I'm the rock. I'm everything you need. Why don't people follow Christ? I'm talking about God's people. We don't expect the lost world to follow Christ. Well, they don't really realize that He's everything I need. Because if you realize, if you have an ounce of sense, just an ounce, and you realize that's everything I need, and you go the opposite direction, are you stupid? That doesn't make sense. So these people who say, well, I believe He's everything I need, but then they go the opposite direction, what are they saying? Well, I'm just ignorant. I don't have enough sense. No, they don't know. They don't know. They don't really believe that He's everything I need. Because if you believe that, you'll follow Him. He's everything I need. And that's what the Lord is telling him here in verse 18. Now, we realize there's much church truth in that verse. But there's also much practical truth there. He's telling Peter, you can't do this on your own. It's me. Everything is leading to follow me. He's saying, I'm the foundation. I'm the foundation. Again, everything leading to follow me. Also, verse 18, there must be a conviction that Christ's work cannot be thwarted, cannot be overturned. That is, what He does perfectly. Christ went on to declare that He would build His church, that it would be built upon the foundation of Himself, and the result of that is the result of the fact that it is His doing and that He is the foundation. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. That is, it's not going to be defeated. Not because of what it is, but because of who He is. Because of what He does. So, He's telling Peter, my work, what I do, cannot be overturned. Again, everything leading to follow me. So in order to live that life, follow me, there must be the personal persuasion that He's everything I need. There must be the personal persuasion that His ways cannot be overturned. They're perfect. They're perfect. Why don't people follow Christ? Because they believe they have a better way. Oh, they're not honest enough to come out and say, well, the reason I don't follow Christ is because I believe my way's better. Have you ever heard someone say that? No, you're not going to. Because God's people have learned to paint with different brush. And they know what they're supposed to say. But the reason they don't follow is because they don't believe that Christ is there. It hasn't got a hold of them. Also, there must be, again, all this working together, a feeling of compulsion toward the will of God. That is, God's will is right, and I am compelled. I feel a drawing to His will. Verse 21. Jesus began to show unto his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem. How he must go into Jerusalem. And what he's saying there is much more than a declaration of his sufferings, his death, and resurrection. He's setting forth himself as an example. He's setting forth himself as an example, leading to, follow me. Follow me. Notice, what Christ showed them was how that he must. How that he must go unto Jerusalem. He says, I have to do this. I have to. And suffer, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. Humanly speaking, there is nothing positive in suffering and being killed. This was a declaration of his compulsion, his obsession, his fixation of heart, his spirit, his attitude toward the will of God. I must. I must. Everything again is leading to the ultimate life of follow me. And in order to live that life, there must be a personal compulsion, obsession, and fixation to do the will of God. I must do the will of God. I must go to Jerusalem. And then in verse 22 and 23, again Peter responds, and Christ rebukes Peter's attitude, which was detrimental to this spirit of I must go to Jerusalem. Peter took him and began to rebuke him. People say, can you imagine? Oh, God's people do it often. They have that much nerve to pull the Lord aside and rebuke him in many different forms. That would be another message, many different forms of ways we can do this. But he took him aside and rebuked him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord. What is he saying? Lord, no, you're too good for this. You're too good to go to Jerusalem and suffer and be killed. You're above that. This shall not be unto thee. Lord, you don't do that. He's turning him away from the will of God. I've seen it. I've heard it with my own ears. God's people encouraging God's people to go the opposite direction of God's will. Seen it many, many, many times. That is the work of Satan. And notice verse 23. But he turned and said unto Peter. So he's looking right at Peter. Christ is looking right at him. He says, Get thee behind me, Satan. He's addressing Peter. Peter was doing the devil's work. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God. So here's the root problem with Peter. Why did Peter say that? Lord, be it far from thee. You can't do that, Lord. You're above suffering. Now, a lot of God's people will think they are. They're above poverty. They're above hardships. Well, the Lord wouldn't lead me into a place where I've got to work. The Lord wouldn't lead me into a place where I'm going to suffer. Are you above it? No, you're not. None of us are. And why do we think that way? Well, the Lord gives us the answer. For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Your priorities are wrong. Your priorities are wrong. And this is why people don't follow Christ. Their priorities are wrong. They savorest not the things of God. No one's that honest. You ask somebody who's obviously not following the Lord, and you ask them, why aren't you following the Lord? I guarantee you they will not say, I do not savorest the things of God. They're not going to be that honest. They're going to blame their wife. They're going to blame their husband. They're going to blame the church. They're going to blame the pastor. They're going to blame everything but what the real problem is. So in order to follow Him, there has to be this compulsion toward the will of God. Verse 24. Well, Christ warned against this attitude again in verse 25. He said, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And isn't that what Peter was telling Christ to do? Lord, spare thyself. You don't have to do this. Spare yourself. Those who are of that attitude, whosoever will save his life shall lose it. And oh, what we lose by not following the will of God. And whosoever will lose his life, or be willing to lose his life for my sake, shall find it. In other words, he'll find real life. He'll be happy. Verse 24, the will, so we have this compulsion, this desire toward the will of God, I must. The will must be engaged to follow Christ. He says, if any man will come after me, and then skip down and follow me. If any man will, that speaks of desire. That speaks of desire. It conveys the idea of determination. It conveys the idea of resolve. There's an aspiration. There's an eagerness. There may even be an enthusiasm. If any man will. Again, everything is leading up to follow me. So in order to live this life of follow me, there must be a single-mindedness and firmness of purpose toward Christ. If any man will. Desire is not enough. Oh, I desire to do what's right. I desire to serve God. That's not enough. The desire has to be strong enough to engage the will. And until that happens, nothing happens. That as far as following Christ. So the desire for Him must be stronger than any other desire. And there are God's people who say, you've got to believe, I want to serve the Lord. Okay, let's say I believe that. But I don't believe that desire is stronger than your desire to please yourself. Because if it was, you'd follow Him. So it's not just the desire. What is the strength of the desire? Is it strong enough to engage the will? Is it strong enough to engage the will? I want to be, well, I really don't, but I want to be across the street. I can stand here and say how much I desire that. I'm not going to get there until the will is engaged to get me there. I have no desire to go across the street. There must be an attraction to Christ. If any man will come after me, Christ is the attraction. Why is it that people do not consistently follow Christ? Because Christ is not the attraction. The world's the attraction. Self is the attraction. Follow me. Christ must be the attraction. There must be a denial of self. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself let him deny himself. So again, desire and attraction are not enough to give us this life of follow me, because there's an obstacle. And it is a huge obstacle. Self. No bigger obstacle. It's bigger than Satan. It's bigger than the world. It's bigger than your husband. It's bigger than your wife. It's bigger than your children. Self. Biggest obstacle. The following Christ. So desire and attraction are not enough to live this life. But the desire and the attraction must be so great, so powerful, so influential, so dominant that it causes us to deny ourselves. That's how strong the desire has to be. To deny self is to oppose self. To oppose ourselves. It is to refuse self. It is to say no to self. Self will say, I want to do that. And you say, no, we're not doing that. It is saying no to self. It's turning self down. The reason a lot of folks do not follow Christ, they just cannot turn themselves down. They just refuse to do it. There has to be a renouncing, a rejection of self. We are to deny self. This is more than giving up a few things. Many have been led to believe that they're serving the Lord because they've given up certain things. Well, I don't go to the theater. Well, good for you. That doesn't mean you're serving the Lord. Oh, I don't smoke. Well, good for you. That doesn't mean you're serving the Lord. But people have been led to believe if I give up X amount of things, then I'm faithful. And no doubt, in order to serve the Lord, there are things that must be forsaken. But Jesus takes it further. He says you have to deny yourself. So he stands opposed to the entire self system. And so it is, if we're going to follow Christ, we have to stand opposed to the entire self system. Again, deny yourself. Everything is leading to follow me. We're not going to follow him on a consistent basis if we do not consistently deny self. And even when you think you're doing great, self will raise its ugly head and you have to say no. 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 There must be a taking up of the cross. Let him deny himself and there's a connection showing that the order is significant. First, there has to be a denying of self and take up. That means lay hold of his cross. So, denial of self is a prerequisite to this action of taking up the cross. And notice, take up the cross. It's something we do. It's not something done to us. It is something that we do. And we do it willingly. If I pick up something, I picked it up because I wanted to. I didn't pick it up by accident. I picked it up on purpose. Take up the cross. It's not something laid upon us. It's not something we accidentally come across. It's something we must do. And it follows denying self. It follows that. I do not believe, it's preached this way most of the time, I do not believe that this cross has reference to our difficulties or our trials or our afflictions or our sorrows. You hear people say all the time, well, I've got to bear my cross. That's the cross the Lord has given me. This isn't something given to you. This is something you take up. You take up this cross. So it's not something that's given to us, but it has reference to what Jesus began to show His disciples back in verse 21. He speaks of a principle of life. I must go to Jerusalem to suffer and to die. The cross was the expression of the world's hatred. In order to live this life of following Him, we have to be willing, we have to volunteer, and we will take it. The hatred, the ridicule, the mockery, the rejection that the world is going to show. You have to be willing to take that. Well, who in the world is going to be willing to take that? The one who denies himself. That's why you have to deny self. It's not our nature. Oh yeah, I'm willing to be hated. I'm willing for everybody to hate me. That's not our nature. We want to be liked. We want to be liked. We want to be approved. We want to be accepted. But we have to be willing to be hated. We have to be willing to be ridiculed. Well, I don't think anybody should be ridiculed or mocked. Lord was. And we have to be willing to do that. And if we're not willing to do that, what's the problem? Well, we haven't denied ourselves. That's the problem. That's what we have to fix. Again, it all leads to follow me. Take up his cross and follow me. That's our life. That should be our life. He leadeth me beside the still waters, and I follow him. Following him is in direct opposition to the thinking of the world. It is in direct opposition to the thinking of man. I've had people tell me, well, I asked my uncle, and he said, you're wrong. Well, your uncle's lost. Why are you asking him? Opposition to the thinking of the world. A way of living that stands in opposition to even so-called Christendom. Good Christianity today is what Peter said to Christ. Oh, Lord, that's too... No, you're above that, Lord. You're above that. How many times God's people say, oh, no, the Lord wouldn't have you suffer that way. Why not? Who are you? What makes you so special? Stands contrary to the perceptions and the priorities and the values and the concerns, the loyalties of the world, and even so-called Christendom. It's a way of living that is thoroughly for Christ. And the end result is, in this life, you don't have to wait to heaven. There will be still waters. There will be still waters. If you follow him, there will be still waters. Oh, you may follow him through the storm, but I'm telling you, there will be still waters. There will be places of rest. There will be places of spiritual refreshment. So again, it's in Psalm 23:2, it's he, me. He, me. That ought to be our life. And it needs to be in that order. He, me. Not me, he. But he, me. Again, these green pastures and still waters are special places for the child of God. Places that are available, places that are accessible, And this is so throughout our life. Throughout our life. They are not places produced by us. Well, I'll create my own still waters. No, you won't. They're not places created by circumstances. Circumstances don't have to be perfect to have still waters and green pastures. But they're places that relate directly to the person and nearness of God. He maketh me, He leadeth me. Just a steady, humble walk in His footsteps, in His path, and there will be green pastures. There will be still waters. Well, I just don't have many green pastures. Have them on occasion. Don't have many still waters. Every now and then. What's the problem? He leads to those. The problem is us. The problem is we're not following. So we need to, if we're going to live this Psalm 23 life, we have to address the real problem, and the real problem is us. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us in singing. Let's all stand, Brother Ben.